Imagine the last years of your life. Who will you be surrounded by? When your body begins to age, when your legs become unsteady and you can no longer bathe yourself, who will be there? How will they care for you? By the year 2030, in just 16 years, the number of older Americans is set to nearly double, skyrocketing from 40 to 73 million people. And as we live longer, the number of us suffering from chronic conditions, as well as things like depression and loneliness at the end of life, will increase. And it's estimated that 70% of adults will eventually be unable to care for themselves unassisted. As a 6-year-old, I remember holding my mom's hand as we walked down the hall of the nursing home where my great-grandmother lived. I could hear echoed moans and pleas for help behind the closed doors that we passed. And as I stood, staring at her, nearly holding my breath, I could see fear in my great-grandmother's eyes, requiring more care than we could give. She had been plucked from the family home and deposited in this medical prison. And although we visited her, we had no idea what to say, and she had no words left to communicate with us. The majority of us, more than 2/3, will die this way, in a medical institution, away from the familiarity of home and our loved ones. I didn't want this to happen to my great-grandmother or to anyone I loved. So, 7 years ago, I began my doctoral studies in linguistic anthropology. My initial goal was to try to understand how young Catholic women learned to be nuns. There was just one small problem. When I arrived at the convent, I had just unpacked my bags in the convent bedroom where I would be living. I discovered that there were only 2 nuns, 2 young nuns. The majority of the 250 nuns in this convent were in their 70s, 80s, 90s, 100s. Half of them lived in the infirmary wing and the assisted living wing of the convent, and they no longer wore habits. When I first went into that infirmary in the convent, it appeared to be quite similar to my great-grandmother's nursing home. I could hear faraway moans. I could see medical furniture. There were nurses in scrubs. But then it quickly became clear that this place was really quite different. Sister Betsy was one of the first people I met in the convent infirmary. Sitting in her chair, unable to walk due to spinal deterioration, she, unlike my great-grandmother, had no fear in her eyes. She was chronically ill, but her way of being in her body was warm, confident, unashamed. Whenever someone walked into the room, her eyes would light up, and she would take their hand in hers. Walking out of Sister Betsy's room, I remember seeing a 100-year-old nun wandering down the hall in her wheelchair. She was babbling non-syllables. I was sure that nobody could understand what she was saying. But every nun and every nurse who passed her would reach out and touch her and address her as a competent, valued member of the community. In the United States, elderly people are usually spoken to with a type of condescending speech that researchers call elder speak. It involves simplified sentences and demeaning endearments, things like, "Hi, honey, are we ready to put on our sweater?" It's nearly ubiquitous in nursing homes and assisted living homes, and it causes cognitive decline. But it never happened in the convent infirmary. When fellow nuns would visit the elderly nuns who were shaking from Parkinson's or who could no longer speak, they would share with them the day's news. They would reminisce with them. They would play cards with them. They treated them as competent peers right up to the very end. I found in the convent that aging didn't have to be simply endured. It could be lived gracefully, with love, peace, acceptance. Epidemiologists have found that Catholic nuns, like the ones in my study, experience greater health and longevity than the rest of us. Some of the reasons for this are straightforward. For example, they have consistent nutrition throughout their adult lives. They continue to work and engage their brains for a lot longer than their contemporaries. And they have higher education than their peers. Some of the reasons for this are also their religious lives. For example, the nuns believe that when they die, they have something to look forward to, that they'll go to heaven, that they'll be reunited with their peers. But a lot of their religious practices are also social practices. And a lot of what the nuns do is really about caring for each other and not necessarily about communicating with a higher being. For example, when the nuns pray, I found that they ask God for help in the world. But when I began to decode these prayers, I found that on top of this basic structure of the prayer, the nuns had embedded additional information that was actually directed to the other nuns in the room. And so, for example, if they were praying for a nun who had fallen and broken her hip, they would include information in the prayer about what room and what floor this nun was on. So it became clear that these prayers, that the nuns had developed this code that built into their everyday lives a way of communicating to each other the needs of the people in the convent without having to ask each other directly for help. Something that actually, asking directly for help is something that actually creates stress, both in the person doing the asking and in the person providing the care. The prayers did other things as well. For example, although the nuns, of course, want to be healthy and they work towards wellness, they almost never ask God for the impossible. So I never heard prayers for someone to be completely cured from cancer. Instead, I heard the nuns pray for someone who was ill to experience serenity or peace in her illness. And the nuns also used prayer as a way to teach each other how to age. So they served as gentle reminders to the nuns that although illness and death were unavoidable, they were not alone, and these things could be endured, and endured more easily if one focused not on the pain itself, but on a sense of peace and love and acceptance. Neurologists have shown that the brain is flexible and that the tasks or things we repeat over and over and over again become routinized pathways in the brain. The same is true for language and emotion. So we speak what we experience, and we experience what we speak. The emotions that we call up again and again, like the nuns do when they pray, using words to cultivate a sense of peace, love, support. If we do this over and over, the brain becomes trained to recognize these emotions more quickly and easily. And while many of us know that if we exercise and we eat well, we'll age better, we'll be healthier, what the nuns teach us is that the way we speak to each other can also play a profound role in how we age. My work has focused on elderly nuns, but in reality, these women have practiced this way of communicating since they joined the convent as 18-year-old girls. Could it be that what the nuns possess and practice daily, being fully present in the moment and accepting what is, could this approach to life be a roadmap for us all? My dream is that we take the essence of what we've learned from the nuns and begin to apply it to our own lives. Why wait until you're 70, 80, 90? Whatever your age, consider the language you use every day. The practices you engage in each day could hold the mirror to your future.